My name is William Swinton. Good evening from my home to your home. Like millions around the world, we're social distancing and staying home. I serve as the Director of International Business Studies for Temple University, Japan. And TUJ is delighted to host the Sustainable Roundtable, which asks the question, how can we go from vision to action in terms of sustainability? And tonight's focus will be the impact of COVID-19 on sustainability initiatives. We're using this current lockdown situation as an occasion to innovate on our normally in-person format. So let me just make a few announcements. First, we are recording this session. Therefore, we have muted your microphone and turned off your cameras. If you wish to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat function. You'll find that at the middle bottom of your Zoom screen. This session should last about 60 minutes, after which we'll ask you to turn on your cameras and turn on your mics, and we'll all see what happens when we talk at the same time in a networking event for about a half an hour after that initial formal recorded 60-minute session. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to turn it over to Donald Eubank for a further introduction.
Thank you, Swint, and thanks for joining us for the 6th in our series of roundtables at Temple University with Read the Air. I'm Donald Eubank, co-founder of Read the Air with Trista Bridges, and the series is based on work that we did together in our book, Leading Sustainably, The Path to Sustainable Business and How the SDGs Changed Everything, to be released this summer from Routledge. Given the current situation, this session is focused on exploring what the impact of the COVID-19 crisis will have on sustainability programs, and if sustainability practices have helped businesses weather the storm. We spoke with Dr. Mark Milstein of Cornell University, Annette Stube, former Chief Sustainability Officer of Maersk, and Eliza Eubank of Citibank's Environmental and Social Risk Management team. And we'll discuss their comments today with Heather Clancy, Editorial Director at Greenbiz. Please forgive us if there are any technical difficulties. This is the first time we've done a virtual roundtable. But now Trista will start us off by introducing the results of a survey that we shared with our clients and contacts to find out how their businesses were thinking about sustainability in their future efforts. Trista?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. As Donald mentioned, we ran a very short survey where we asked businesses about how they were responding to COVID, how their organizations were responding. And now we'd like to show you a few of the results. This is just a quick snapshot. So we asked several questions with the survey. And the first one we asked was around, has the focus on sustainability increased, decreased, or remained the same at their company? The interesting thing is that most said remain the same. Of course, we don't know whether they felt good about that or not, but there doesn't seem to have been any change in the short term. And actually 30%, which is very interesting, said that it increased. So that's quite promising. And it shows, I think, that some businesses are starting to make this connection between many of the challenges and crises we're seeing and sustainability. The next question we asked, another question we asked was around whether they anticipate that the company's sustainability priorities will change or remain the same. So what the company will focus on. And most people felt that it would change. And that's also another interesting finding that I think people are anticipating change, certainly going forward. And on the next slide, I'd like to show you a couple additional results. So one of the things that we were quite concerned about, and I know a lot of people in the field are thinking about, is what's going to happen with sustainability budgets and people and that type of thing. Will they be cut? Most people said that they thought it would remain the same. And again, we don't know if they're happy or not happy about the level of support the organization is giving currently. But about 27% felt that it would be, and the other one is about 27%, sorry, as well, that's unable to see that percentage. But an additional 27% felt that the resources and the investment would actually increase. So this is also quite promising, I think, that people feel that there's probably going to be a move in the right direction around sustainability as a result of the crisis. Now, one of the following questions that we actually shared, we asked people, which I want to share with you right now, is what do you think CEO priorities should be as a result of the crises? And so there were 4 themes, many answers were given, but there were 4 that kind of were reoccurring. And the first one was around supply chains. This is something that, that many organizations were discussing as being a challenge for them. Resilience is something that we heard that organizations really need to be, learn how to be more resilient. And there's also this idea of really enhancing sustainability strategy and making that more part of what the business does. And then lastly, long-term perspective, having a longer-term perspective instead of a short-term one. We're going to hear many of those themes as we go through today. And what we'd like to do now is actually share a clip from Dr. Mark Milstein's interview that we did with him recently. That Donald just referenced. He talks about some of those themes in his discussion, and particularly how organizations are responding to COVID at the moment.
And overall, it's clear that, you know, folks are of multiple minds here. One, certain industries, for example, food and beverage, those folks are just trying to figure out, at least here in the United States in particular, they're trying to figure out how to meet sudden supply problems, right? So in terms of, not supply in terms of getting raw materials for them, but really it's how do they satisfy the sudden increase in demand that occurred here in the United States, because there was a real run on stores very quickly. Items like toilet paper, and sanitized wipes and Purell hand gel, those got a lot of press, but just about everything all of a sudden was flying off the shelves. So we're working with, for example, a company that makes a snack product and is trying to figure out how exactly they want to develop a sustainability strategy that works for their company. And you know, on the one hand, they're being slammed. They said demand was 300% normal demand for the month, and they're just running their production as much as they can to try to keep up with it. They got caught you know, by surprise at how much things were flying off the shelf, and now they're trying to just meet the demand as best they can. On the other hand, you know, we had scheduled with that same company, we had scheduled an on-site visit for about just a little under 2 weeks ago, and that was when we shut down. So we decided not to do that, and instead we went virtual with the meeting. And it was with a slate of senior executives in the company. And the great thing was everybody showed up, everybody talked throughout the day. And it was interesting because on the one hand, in the short term, they are trying to meet this real rapid response that they have in the market. On the other hand, they're not taking their eye off the ball. They still are saying, and this gets echoed out in a lot of the other companies we're working with in different industries, sustainability just as important as it ever was, if not more so, because these issues that we're dealing with today are directly linked to sustainability issues that the field has been talking about for decades.
So Mark was explaining what he saw companies mostly in the US do in immediate response to the crisis, but it really is similar to what we've seen everywhere. I'm joined now by Heather Clancy of Greenbiz to discuss Mark's comments and what she herself has been hearing. Heather and I first met at Greenbiz's excellent Verge series of conferences focused on Hawaii's ambitious 100% renewable energy and zero carbon plans. Good morning to you, Heather, and thanks for joining us at this early hour from New Jersey. How do Mark's comments compare to what you've been hearing from your contacts?
Good evening, everyone there. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. As you can see, it's getting brighter in here. The sun's coming up. So yeah, quite a few different thoughts. I will start with I'll start with food, since you brought that up as one area that is of particular concern, and a slightly different point of view, because indeed it's been ridiculous. I'm sure it has been odd in other places as well, that the demand and supply dynamics have been completely upended, and that supermarkets and grocery stores and, you know, wherever you buy your food and important items have been disrupted. Also, though, we've seen a very different dynamic in the food industry here in the United States with a lot of the local farming movement, the local food movement, and so forth was taking place in different cities around the country. And that has been upended because of the restaurants all being closed. So while we see a lot of supply problems, like too little supply, we also see too much supply. So you have companies like Publix in Florida that are pivoting to buy more food from local farmers because the supply is being unfortunately plowed under in the fields, and milk is being dumped and eggs are being destroyed. There's a very big oversupply problem in certain areas, especially with the local farmers that have increased their production. So that's one thing I want to mention. The other thing I think that is for me particularly poignant is that if you think about environmental, social, and governance issues and the increase in attention that companies have put on that, this has really shone the light on the S part of the sustainability strategies of these companies. And by that, I mean not just social, but also safety. So that you have companies now that are very, very focused on when we start opening again, how can we have people in this facility, this factory, this field, this office in the most safe way possible. So it has really shone a light on the human aspects of sustainability that I think many people hadn't necessarily integrated into their strategies before. You heard a little bit talking about it, but now there's a lot more attention, obviously, because of the urgency of dealing with the immediate crisis.
I'm curious, have you seen any examples of companies that had been already very forward on their thinking about social issues and how they've responded in comparison to other companies?
Well, I think that, and you could argue whether the tech companies have good social strategies. However, they're more attuned to I mean, it's very different, right? So you have knowledge workers, you have people that have to be in a place to do their job. You have so you see a lot of the tech companies were very quick to say work at home, and then they could, right? The jobs could be put to home, but you did see a lot of the sort of knowledge worker companies immediately say in early March in the United States. I know that the tail of everything has been different. But in the United States, early March was the time when we really began saying, whoa, what? And so you saw a lot of tech companies do it early. By contrast, you did see a lot of supermarkets floundering, the bigger ones, not the smaller ones like the Wegmans, the regional ones. And again, I'm speaking about brands here to the US, so sorry. But some of the smaller, more focused on employees from the get-go were focusing on those essential workers, putting safety measures in place, making sure that their leave policies were robust enough to handle what was going on, hiring, putting safety measures in place in their organization. So you saw that happening. You didn't probably see it happening quick enough with some of the bigger food companies. Unfortunately, I'll give you an example. Smithfield, which is the big pork company, bacon, had an issue where they had to actually close down a major facility because they hadn't responded quickly enough, and they discovered they had a lot of workers who were ill. So it did catch people that were prepared. They were able to pivot more quickly than some of the other companies.
Trista, do you have a follow-up question you'd like to ask?
Yes, I'm curious as to how companies that have an extensive global footprint are dealing with this, because obviously they have so many of the different regions and countries have been responding so differently. They have different rules and different laws. How has that, have you heard anything from companies that you've spoken with, how they're grappling with that?
Well, it's hard to know what part of what I'm about to say is because of the political things that are going on or because of their actual supply footprint. So for example, 3M, right? So the maker of the N95 masks that everyone wanted, and we need them. So they have obviously had a very large supply chain problem, right? So they couldn't get them quick enough. And when they started getting them quick enough, they started being told by the US government where they were allowed to send them. So they had to think differently about how they were going to allocate that supply than in the past. So whereas in the past, maybe they were making masks in a country that were designated for that country, now they were being told by their home country that they had to bring them back home. So you saw companies dealing with some requests that were unusual, right? So, and again, because of the nature of the situation, I don't know that they would happen again, but you did see a lot of, like some of my friends who had really just never really thought about this score. Wow, why are they allowed to set? I'm like, well, that's where they make them. They're a company that has facilities around the world, and they do manufacturing locally in those countries. And that's where the supply is going. And no one ever really thought about that as being bad before. But now we're saying, well, why, if you have this capacity, why aren't you dedicating it to us? So that was sort of I suppose, a unique issue, much down on the much smaller end of the spectrum. And I'm going to give a plug for a company that's here in the United States that is working on more circular approach to delivering cleaning supplies, and they're called 3Main. And I ordered some supplies from them because you couldn't get them in the stores. I ordered some supplies online weeks ago, and I still do not have them. I've every few weeks gotten a note from them saying, we still can't get our supply. We still can't get, so a much smaller company is being very, and that's not a global question, but they can't get products locally because of the global supply problems.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, actually now what we want to do is we want to start talking a little bit about sustainability and how that might affect companies and how they might change the way they think about it and some of the actions that they take. And so to do that, we're actually going to look at another short clip. We did an interview with Annette Stube, who's the former head of sustainability at Maersk Group, which is based, I believe, in Denmark. Is that correct, Donald?
Yep.
And she's also a board member at the Finnish clean energy group, Fortum. So let's take a short look at a clip. Take a look at a clip from her on this particular subject.
Who are well versed on the sustainability agenda, who have reached a kind of maturity level, have more quickly than others probably been able to adjust to the situation in the sense of understanding their own role in society. And that's what this is all about, right? That's the request that we are seeing from governments and from stakeholders in general, that you have to step up as a company if you have the means in any way.
Yeah.
And so I think this transition has happened faster in mature sustainability companies, if you will, than others, because they are very well aware and acknowledge their role in society.
I was curious, based on your experience, what kinds of sustainability programs or initiatives do you think would benefit companies the most had they been in place before this happened?
I think not so much a program, but rather a way of approaching the company and society relation is that, the ability to balance different and sometimes contradictory needs is something that, all sustainability people know very well, because that's what we do every day. And I think that's going to be key in this situation, right? To be able to do that in a way that is good for society and is good for the company. And I think companies will be judged on how well they manage this balance going forward, and especially right now during the crisis, but also right after the crisis. And I think that's an ability that companies that have worked with sustainability for many years have built, and is quite good at, but also aware that they can do. So it's an ability, a competency, if you will. I think secondly, but this is how I think you should always build a sustainability program. And I think, and the reason why is that it makes us more resilient and it makes us more sustainable in the long term. But I think if you have a notion that the way your programs are built is that precisely they have to, at the same time, make sense for society and make sense for the business, then they will be more resilient. And I think that of course, this is a time where that will show if that's true. But if you have programs that just benefit society, that are just a nice philanthropic programs, then in times where the company is under great pressure, that's going to be really challenged as well. Whereas if you have programs that is also a good business case, then why would you close those down? So I think those kinds of programs are going to be more resilient, and probably companies will be, even if they don't like it, they will be forced to think this way.
What do you think that sustainability managers and CEOs need to be moving up the agenda over the next maybe 6 months, 2 years, that really have a good fit, like you talked about, this kind of business case and making a good business case?
I think it will have an overall impact on our, and not just in companies, but in society in general, in our trust in science. This is, fighting this disease is all about science. It's also politics, but it's also science, and it has come up very prominently compared to a lot of other things that we discuss. And this is very, very important in terms of climate change, obviously, and basically a lot of other issues where we are getting near to the planetary boundaries. And so this is, if that happens, that would be really, really important and beneficial to all of us.
What opportunities do you see for business in kind of partnering with or working with authorities, whether they be local authorities or government at a national level?
But I've been very encouraged to see many governments stepping up. Mm-hmm. And, this is what businesses have been asking for a very long time across the sustainability agenda. So whether that's on climate change and, actually doing what is needed there, or whether it's enforcing labor rules, across the world, so that companies don't have to act as police and, to make sure that they don't have violations in their supply chains. So really now, I think for the first time, we see companies really, nation states, so governments really stepping up on this, and some better than others, obviously. But it's really nice to see, that type of action when it happens well, when they can really make a difference, and it goes to show how important they are.
People are starting to recognize the importance of government. Do you think that there will be a different approach in the way that we as a whole think about climate change and about how we can address it or how we should address it?
I'm happy to see in many of the stimulus packages that come from governments that there are green demands attached. And obviously, if you want to boost the economy, why would you not do it in a green way? Because that's something we have to do anyway. So I'm hopeful that that's gonna, remind us all when we get to the other side of this, that we have another important thing that we have to do as well.
Really interesting. So Annette is quite positive, I think, about the importance of sustainability in companies and kind of helping them deal with the fallout of this crisis and going forward. What are your thoughts on that, Heather?
Well, I would say she's in Europe, and she's not in the United States. I do, from the companies that I have talked to, there is a lot of positive. I mean, I shouldn't be so facetious. I will note that her comments on the green stimulus, while I love the spirit of them, that is not going to be the focus of the current administration in the United States. It would be wonderful if we could tie sustainability, environmental sustainability concerns to the stimulus, but we have not at this time. There was a big fight over the bailout for the aviation sector, for example, that became very political. At the same time, there has been more of a focus on the human part of sustainability. So, for example, there were conditions made that you had to use that money in a certain way. You couldn't buy back stock. You had to make sure that you were employing people. So that so I will say she has a very European centric view of the world in that part of the comments. To go just to general strategy, I do feel that the companies that had begun to integrate environmental issues into their business decisions, because it was a risk, right? It's a risk. Have benefit. They are not. I don't really see much change in their philosophy. They are the companies that I've had communications with are 100% long-term focused on those goals. Yes, they're responding to an urgent crisis, but they are also using this internally as a way of saying, look what can happen. We're dealing with this long-term crisis, climate change. This is the sort of thing we've been talking about. So it's kind of an aha moment for the strategists within these companies to help. I don't want to use the word opportunity, because this is not an opportunity, this is a crisis, but they are using the situation to put that and make it more visible to their colleagues. So, I feel like I'm not worried about the majority of the companies that Greenbiz covers, because I feel like this is embedded in their strategy now. But I do worry a little bit about the short-term blip in terms of funding. Because if sales are way off, and they are for some companies, that's going to be a problem.
So you mean sales in the sense of, they're basically pulling back on initiatives or investment because they're dealing with the sales fallout?
Well, I would say that I absolutely agree with Annette. I'm sorry, that was her name, right?
Yeah, Annette, yes.
Yes,
fine,
yeah. On the idea of, if you had something philanthropic, if you had a nice to have effort that you were funding that didn't have a strong business tie or business justifiability, that could be under pressure. But a lot of the philanthropic stuff is usually handled more in the foundations. And so that's kind of a different, so I feel like because sustainability has become at many companies more deeply embedded into just the decision-making process in general, that you're not going to see, wholesale like staff cuts. You might see money going away for, well, one area where we will just see an immediate disruption is in reporting, right? That's been a big, people take their numbers, their greenhouse gas emission numbers, they roll them up every year, they do their water data, they are trying to report on progress. I do see the reporting progress being compromised because for two reasons. One is the focus has to be elsewhere, and secondarily, the numbers are going to be way out of whack. I mean, like how do you report this quarter versus last quarter of 2019? The production dynamics are so different that it's going to be very difficult to figure out how much of the emissions progress is just because everything was shut down versus, they made progress in what they were trying to do. So I think that is one area where we'll see a compromise. And And it's hard to justify putting all sorts of people on those numbers right now when they should be focused on other things. So, you know, it's almost a little bit too early to tell, but yeah, that's one area where I think we'll see an immediate impact.
Interesting. Donald, any follow-up questions from you?
Actually, I think that you kind of already discussed what I was thinking of asking, so more of a comment. What you say to me kind of scares me, because in the writing of the book, we spoke to a lot of European companies, we spoke to American companies, and European companies have a very different perspective, much more of a sense of stewardship than American companies. American companies kind of go it alone, they don't have policy backing them. And what you're describing sounds as if that this is not a wake-up call to businesses that have not embraced sustainability, that it could have been a great resource for them to tap into during this time. Is that correct in kind of what you're expressing?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that I would say that the number of companies that weren't thinking about it much before are really woken up to it. I mean, there's huge swaths of the economy. Like, I just think that so many people were caught flat-footed, right? The ones that weren't caught flat-footed are the ones that have been thinking about sustainability. They kind of had, it's like almost like I covered technology for a long time, and there was always this whole big thing about business continuity planning. And until no one wanted to do it, until there was something that, you know, their data center blew up and all of a sudden they had a huge problem. And then that's when they did it. Unfortunately, this is kind of the same, you know, the same phenomenon happening with sustainability, the supply chain. I mean, and I think for me, this one of the things that I really am curious about is what this will do to the supply chain dynamics, because there was already this fair amount of talk about people needed to localize their supply chains a little bit more than they had, or at least reduce their reliance on China. But this is going to accelerate that. So the ones that were serious about that are going to, I think, you're going to see a lot of changes in that over the months to come. The thing that concerns me about that is that could go to countries that haven't really thought about sustainability in the same way. As an example, Vietnam, it's a much more nascent environment there. What is the policy? What do you do? So when you look at companies like Apple that have spent a lot of money in China with renewable energy, with all sorts of different efficiency measures to make their supply chain there more sustainable than in other places, are they going to have to do that all over again in Vietnam or wherever else they choose to go? Will that become a big investment they have to make? I think we're going to get a little bit more into finance in a moment, and so I'll save my comments. But
and I think we should come back to supply chain in the Q&A session, because it is such a big question, and you start to touch upon Asia there. Part of my fear is that Japan often follows the U.S., so what you're describing could have a potentially negative way to think. Yeah. But yeah, let's move on, because the next section actually gets into what you're talking about, reporting as well, and a little bit of a different perspective around the task force for climate-related financial disclosures. So finally, we have Eliza Eubank from Citibank, who, full disclosure, is my younger and much more organized sister. Eliza is the global head of environmental and social risk management at Citi, which is ESRM for short. And she shared her views about what comes next, especially in the world of finance and sustainability, and what her ESRM team is working on right now.
In terms of what Citi is doing right now, a lot of the focus, of course, is on supporting the liquidity of our clients. A lot of companies are, being stretched right now with the economic slowdown, the slowdown in trade, the slowdown in travel. And so when it comes to sort of liquidity facilities, that's not as much the project-related lending that the ESRM policy is founded on. So there's not as much for my team, the ESRM team, to do, except to advise on kind of where you may see the intersection in between this current concerns of the economic impacts of coronavirus and, say, the climate risk work that I talked about we've been doing for a while. So, trying to help think through, as we're helping our clients through this pandemic, making sure that we're still making smart risk decisions, and then that we're not feeling pressed and rushed to help clients who perhaps, over time, the world may look different when we get out of this pandemic, and we want to make sure that we're still making smart risk decisions through it.
Has it changed the way that you've looked at these companies in any way, or is it still basically the same?
One of the things that I expect to take out of this pandemic is learnings for the nascent field of climate stress testing, climate scenario analysis on a bank's portfolio. Since the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures came out in 2017, banks and asset managers, asset owners have really been looking at, how do I try to quantify climate risks across my portfolio? How do I run climate scenario analysis to understand which of my clients, may, as I said, be better able to weather a low carbon transition and still have, functioning business, a high credit rating, and which ones are not. And so a lot of that brain power that I'm trying to figure out, what are the methodologies, how we can design climate stress tests for banks, climate scenario analysis, they're now all pulled over to working on COVID-19 stress tests, COVID-19 scenario analysis. Okay, if the world pulls out of this in May, if the world pulls out of this in September, if there's a prolonged shutdown for a year, how will different clients in our portfolio fare? And whereas there's a lot of interest and energy around the climate risk analysis, obviously this COVID-19 is more pressing, hands-on deck type of work. And so I think the learnings from doing these stress tests on the impacts from COVID-19, we should be able to take some of those out when we're done, when we're past the pandemic, to see how we can apply those to longer term climate stresses.
Do you think that 6 months from now or 12 months from now, that there'll be a recognition that if businesses were more ambitious about their social and environmental and other sustainable practices, that it will help them in the future if there's other events like this?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that, so going back to the question of emerging from different crises, for Citi ourselves, I started at Citi in September 2007. I came back after spending a summer internship in 2006. So I like to say that I buckled my seatbelt, got in the front row of the roller coaster, buckled my seatbelt, and dove straight off a cliff into the financial crisis. And I just joined, as the newest member of a small team. And through the years of the financial crisis, no one who worked in these emerging sustainability areas in the bank were laid off. There were layoffs across the bank, but that didn't mean that Citi took a step back on these public sustainability commitments that we'd made. So I don't foresee companies kind of reversing track or shutting down sustainability initiatives. I think focus might be a little bit elsewhere right now in terms of pandemic response. That doesn't mean that the sustainability work is dropped. And I think it will probably change in response a bit. I think one of the trends you're seeing in the sustainability space in banking in the last few years is the growth of green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds, and also sustainability-linked loans. So with the green bond space, you're helping a company to structure a green bond framework that says, I want to raise money, and I will only use it for this series of environmentally positive projects, whether it's renewable energy or, reducing waste flows. And then I'm going to report out to my bond investors on it. On the sustainability linked loan space, it's structuring a loan so that the company makes a public commitment to some sustainability initiative. Again, the easiest one to pick out is renewable energy. I will build 25 megawatts of renewable energy projects over the next X years. And if they don't meet intermediary milestones towards that goal, then they actually get dinged on the interest rate that they pay on their loan. So they have a financial incentive to really meet these commitments. So I think once we're through this pandemic, you will see those types of sustainable finance products really picking up, because it's a way for these companies who have weathered the storm to communicate externally and sort of put the money where their mouth is on how they're going to emerge from this crisis, with a sort of solid goal and game plan for improving the sustainability of their operations.
There we go. We finally did it.
You did it, Donald.
We did it. All right.
When did you shave, by the way?
I just drank some magic disinfectant around my house. It reversed my age. I finally learned how to make a good omelet. So green bonds have been very popular in Japan, even if comparatively the volume has been low. And Citibank has been much more active in the space recently, and Eliza sees more green bonds in the future based on companies recognizing the value of improving their environmental and social impacts. Heather, what's Greenbiz's view on the role of finance in reimagining how business works after this?
So I agree with her. I do think there will be more of a focus on these loans being linked to environmental, social, and governance factors. So that we were seeing a increase in that in the months leading up to the crisis. I think we've already seen some pretty substantial, I can't quote the numbers to you, but I think there were several in March. Social bonds focused specifically on COVID-19 response. But I think that as we have to, we know we have to invest out of this crisis. And I think that you will see more of the lenders in around the world tying those two metrics. Again, it's a risk, right? I think that for the banks could use this as a way of coming out of just saying, you know what, we have this much money we want to put into green finance or sustainable finance or whatever you want to call it. Out of this crisis, we are going to tie more bonds to these factors. And it could be specifically social stuff right now, right? Rebuilding communities, making sure there's jobs, small businesses in particular, right? That's in the United States, it's a driver of the economy, and there's just been I don't know if you've been reading the unemployment numbers, but they're just staggering. I think we have something like 30% of the workforce in my state has applied for unemployment. 30%. Wow. So I do think you will see more of the forward-looking banks start to say, yeah, we can actually, now we can do this. Again, I hate to use that O word, but it's an opportunity for them to take that practice and move it to a different place instead of going back to the same old philosophy about investing.
Trista, do you have a follow-up question?
Sure. And then we'll move into Q&A, because I know we've had a lot of questions come in, so I want to give time for people to get some responses to their questions. So this crisis is interesting because, we had the financial crisis, which was kind of the financial industry's fault. So this time it seems that they can play a really big role, as you mentioned, in stepping in to kind of help. Do you see any differences in how, the financial system is global? Do you see any differences in how the financial system might step in the US versus Europe versus Asia? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think we already mentioned before that the comment and the question you asked about the green stimulus, right? So yeah. I do think that there will be more opportunities in Europe for there to be matching funds, right, in terms of government versus private sector infrastructure projects that have a green focus. I think at the state level, you might get that here in the United States. So I'm sure California is thinking, they've already started talking about that, right? California is talking that way. My governor here in New Jersey has been much more focused on that as well. There's a lot of offshore wind projects, for example, that could provide a big boost. They're all on hold right now, of course, but there's a lot of work going on there in New York State. So I feel like, and if you think about it, some of these are countries almost like countries in Europe, right? So there's so there could be some substantial money there. I cannot speak to some of the Asian countries. I just don't have that knowledge, and I don't want to misspeak. But I think that is an opportunity. I do feel optimistic. The only thing that I worry about a teeny bit is making sure that companies that don't already have existing relationships with those financial institutions have a chance, right? Because the first tranche of the money here in the United States that went for the stimulus was the small bit. I mean, you probably read about it, but the small business funds were wiped out almost immediately, not wiped out, but allocated almost immediately. And the preference was given to companies that already had a pre-existing bank, loan relationship with a bank, as well as, unfortunately, some larger companies that shouldn't have been involved in the process. So making sure that that those startups and innovators and so forth that have good ideas out of this get funded, and getting them to have the proper attention is important. And I'm not sure how that happens yet. I just one other comment on, it's a little bit not exactly banking money, but I've spent time talking to about 10 venture capitalists in the past few weeks about climate tech, right? So climate technologies, things like alternative proteins and carbon capture and clean energy and new ways of industrial, making industrial processes work without fossil fuels or, coal or whatever. And they're all completely looking for companies in that sector. So there's no blip in what they want. I actually have on my desk here several funding announcements that I know there's going to be $100 million funding announcement later this week. And I'm like, whoa, I mean, these are not stopping. So the good news, I think is a substantial amount of interest in innovation in the climate crisis. And I think this is making people more hungry for, again, they see the impact. Now they're looking forward into the future.
Great, thanks so much. And we've actually had some discussion on the chat about some financing mechanisms in Asia, and particularly in Japan. And so on our, from 8 o'clock, we're going to have our kind of open discussion, and I do hope that people will stay around, and then we can talk about some of those points then, because I think they're very important. So we want to open up to Q&A now. I know Swint has been working very hard in kind of consolidating some of our questions that have come from all of you. Thank you so much. And I'm trying to think if there's a good question here that we may want to ask first. There was a question actually we had from early on around greenwashing. And so Heather, there's some interest in understanding how greenwashing companies are going to change their sustainability initiative, if at all. And if COVID-19 is just an excuse for companies to be labeled sustainable or more, so an incentive to be more sustainable in the future. So this problem with greenwashing, which often comes up when we all talk about sustainability.
Well, I would say that I haven't heard much of it right in the last couple of weeks because frankly, no one's marketing, right? There's no advertising, there's no marketing going on. People are, two comments. One is it's been very difficult to speak on the record with many of the companies that I deal with. And so I haven't seen, short of some announcement that's went out, like, so for example, you could argue Shell's new plan, is that greenwashing? Are they taking advantage of the situation? I think that was just planned. I don't know about the timing. I don't think the timing is tied to this crisis. I think that some companies that had things planned for months are deciding whether or not they're going to go out publicly with their news. The annual Earth Day onslaught of ridiculous press releases that I normally get was substantially subdued. There were still quite a few of them, I will say, people pitching their green product and so forth. So that didn't really stop entirely, but there was a lot. Out of respect, I think there were a lot fewer. So I haven't seen it. I mean, maybe you guys have a different point of view. I haven't seen a lot of companies trying to take advantage of that yet.
No, I haven't seen much of it. I've been reading quite a bit of stuff out there, and there's a lot around, the world we need to reimagine and that type of thing, which, to be frank, yourself and a lot of people in the industry have been talking about that forever. But
yeah, but, I think you will. I wouldn't necessarily put this in the greenwashing, but you have heard companies be transparent about changes they're making to deal with the crisis. Like an example is Bloom Energy, right? So they make these fuel cell type things that can be a source of energy at a data center or at an office or whatever. And obviously no one was buying their equipment, but they responded to the California governor was basically put a challenge out to manufacturing companies in the state and said, help us make ventilators. And they did. They within 8 hours had figured out how to change their manufacturing line to start making ventilators, or to start not making better ventilators, but taking equipment that was existing and refurbishing it so it could be used. So, there are examples of companies stepping up in a different way.
Yeah, we have two very good questions. I'm going to take one, and then the other one we'll take to the session after. We'll try to get through them quickly. But there was a really good question here around how to factor the impacts of COVID-19 into reporting processes. So you talked about reporting processes earlier, particularly around the SDGs.
Is that a question?
Any thoughts
for me?
around? Yes.
Okay.
Any thoughts on that? I mean, that's obviously a bit of a complicated thing, right? But anything that might happen from that?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on where the money goes, right? So if the money out of this, the longer term money, not the immediate, like where they're putting money to get us out of the next few months, if companies use this as an opportunity to look at different areas of their operation where they haven't been, is focusing on that as much as normal, or not as normal, but as they should. I don't know that I have an immediate response to that. I haven't heard it come up. I actually wondered that the other day. I do unfortunately think you might see less focus on meeting the SDGs in other places and more in their own country. So like as an example, you saw companies like MasterCard, they were very focused on emerging economies and how could they help raise people up out of poverty in other economies. That might be a conversation they need to focus on rural areas in the United States.
I see. That's
so I don't know, you might see companies think about where their efforts are being focused. Because if you are a multinational, and I'll go back to that 3M example, your people in your home country are going to question why you're not helping here and you're helping someone else. And there is already a number of that sort of thing going on, people questioning the focus.
Okay. And one last question before we have to wrap up, and then we move into our post session. There was a very good question here that was quite interesting about construction. So this is an industry that obviously in a lot of countries kind of went on pause when things kind of shut down a little bit. Do you think that this might be an opportunity, particularly in Asia, there's a lot of construction, right? In the US, there needs to be more construction. Do you think there might be an opportunity to integrate more sustainability and environmental type factors in how we build things, and kind of especially in the construction industry?
Sure, but it has to cost the right amount, right? If it costs substantially more, then no, it's not going to happen. I mean, I'm just going to be practical here, especially when you have people now that are going to be worrying about costs. There is absolutely, yep, sorry, go ahead.
Do you think regulation, for example, or rules or laws might change to kind of speed that up?
In places like New York, they are changing. So yes, in the United States, potentially in various cities, but again, at the federal level, don't see it. I don't see it. Yeah. We have an administration that's already backed off the reviews, the environmental reviews for those sorts of projects, for infrastructure projects. So, you know, again, thank God for the governors of the United States, because a lot of them are focusing on this sort of thing, but right now at the federal level, it's not happening.
Yeah, I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens with that space. I think for Asia, I will say that that's an area where it's more of a green space in the sense that there's a lot of opportunity to build better, you know, in a lot of places, particularly coastal areas. So, but that's all the time that we have. Thanks so much, everyone, for the questions. Thank you, Heather. I hope everyone will be able to stick around a little longer afterwards for our post session so we can ask some more questions. And we have a great audience today. So we wanted that session, the audience, to answer some of the questions too, if you know about a particular subject. So please do stay on. Donald, I'll hand it back to you to close us off.
Heather, thanks for your time and your insights today. Really appreciate having you with us. Will you be able to stick around, or do you?
I'm hanging out. I'm hanging out. I haven't had breakfast yet, but I'm good.
Thank you for listening to the Roundtable for Leading Sustainably, hosted by Temple University Japan Campus and Read the Air, a sustainable business advisory firm. Since September 2019, the From Vision to Action Sustainability and Business series has been investigating different aspects of sustainability in the business context, with particular emphasis on Japan and Asia. We would like to thank our contributors to this session on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on sustainability practices: Dr. Mark Milstein of Cornell University, Annette Stube of Fortum and formerly Maersk, Eliza Eubank of Citigroup, and our fellow commentator, Heather Clancy of Greenbiz. Thanks to our ever-gracious Temple host, William Swinton, and to Kevin Hsiao for production assistance. We will have a written summary of the session available at the link in the description below. As well, there will be a full report on the findings of our roundtable in the From Vision to Action series over the past year to be released in the next month. If you would like to be informed of when the report is available, please submit your email address at the same link. Thanks again for joining us, and please stay tuned via email or LinkedIn for further updates on the subject of sustainability in the business world and how the situation is evolving during the COVID-19 crisis.